Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card, I did some hand-drawn stripes with some watercolor. I'm using this tree from the Peaceful Pine set by Stampin' Up. I'm also using this Simon Says Stamp postage die set and my Peerless watercolors. I chose these watercolors for the card because there's a lot of different shades to choose from, and I wanted to choose a couple of different shades of green. I originally was going to do a lot of different shades, and I'll show you what that looked like a little bit later. The reason why I'm not using the star that comes with the Peaceful Pine set is because it's defective and I just haven't had a chance to call customer service about it. Anyway, so I'm going to use my grid sheet and my MISTI to center these two stamps on a piece of 4 1/4 by 3 inch Strathmore watercolor paper, and this is 90-pound watercolor paper. I'll tell you why in a little bit, why I use the 90-pound and not the 140-pound. So here's my stamp. I'm going to stamp it with some VersaFine Black Onyx ink, and I didn't get as much as I wanted, so I'm just going to stamp it again, and with the MISTI it's really easy. And then I just decided to stamp the star by hand. And then I'm going to clear emboss this, which I do a lot. Rather than using black embossing powder and Versamark ink, I like to use the VersaFine pigment ink and then clear embossing on top of that. And then you don't get as much stray black powder. So this is the brush I'm using. It's just a little bit wider than 1/4 of an inch. And these are the 3 Peerless watercolors I'm going to be using. And I'm going to start with the lightest one because I know I want the lightest stripe to be just under the tree trunk so that I can put my sentiment on the lightest color. So I'm just going to brush a stripe very carefully across the bottom where the trunk is, and it's Robin's Egg Blue. Wasn't coming out as dark as it usually does. Maybe it's wearing out and I need to go cut another piece from the original source paper. I might try doing that. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw these stripes. You can draw them as thick or as thin as you want, and I'm just leaving enough space to have 2 colors in between. And the reason why I'm doing it this way instead of just doing them all in a row is because I really want to be careful to make sure that I dry each and every stripe before I apply a stripe next to it. Because I want them to be nice, solid, clear, crisp stripes without blending together. And if there's just a little bit of moistness or dampness on the previous stripe, it'll start blending together, and I want them to definitely be independent stripes. This second color that I'm using is called Hunter's Green, and so I'm just going to continue this process, and then once I'm done with the Hunter's Green, I'm going to fill in all my gaps with the Myrtle Green. So I'm going to go ahead and turn up the music for about a minute or so, and you can watch me finish up this coloring. And so here's what the final product looks like. I like how you can see it through the branches of the tree. So what I decided, now I'm adding some snow with my Versa marker, and there's a thick tip and a thin tip, and I'm using the thin tip because this pen is very old. It's probably like 5 years old. My thick tip isn't as juicy as my thin one, and besides, I think I can get inside these branches a lot easier with the thin side. So I'm just going to color randomly in there, and because this tree is sketched, it doesn't have to be perfectly colored in. So I'm going to use my sparkling snow powder, which I think I need to put this in a Tupperware because I use it so much. And when I sprinkle it on the tree, and I'm just going to do a little piece of the tree at a time just to make it more manageable, you'll see that it really does stick very well with this Versa marker pen. So it's sticking to all the areas I colored. If you get some on top of some of the black embossing, I just took a paper piercer and I just kind of scraped it a little bit to get the powder off, and it comes off really easily. You can also use a brush if you have a really thin brush. And then I'll heat that to set it, and this sparkling powder also has white in it, so you'll get the white effect as well. So I'm going to do another layer with my Versa marker here. And as you can imagine, I'm doing a lot of heating. So I did all the heating with the watercolor stripes, and now I'm heating all of this with the embossing powder. And so my paper is becoming quite warped. and I'll show you why I use the 90-pound. That has to do with the warping. Anyway, so here is my last layer of doing this powder, and I really like how you can still see the watercolor stripes beneath the snow. I just used a brown chocolate chip marker, Stampin' Up, and colored in the trunk, pretty like a sketchy sort of look. Here's my original. Oh my gosh, it's so terrible looking. I can't believe I did this, but I had so many different stripes, and they had blended together because I didn't let them dry. And I was going for that one across the star to be yellow, and it just was so bright and so annoying. So I'm so glad I reduced the number of colors. I'm also using this Ellen Hudson 'Tis the Season stamp just because it has a tiny little sentiment that'll fit inside my stripe. And I put it a little too close to the tree trunk. I wish I had lowered it just a little bit, but whatever, I'm just going with it. So anyway, I'm going to take my postage stamp die, and I measured the paper to fit right in this die before I colored it. And I'm going to take some Stampin' Up! Black paper, and that's what I die cut that with. And now I'll grab my ATG. I'm going to put a lot of tape right along the very, very edge, and you can see how warped this paper is. Now when you use 140-pound paper and it gets very warped and you put it on the top of a piece of paper that's not quite as thick, which typically is what you're going to be using for making layers, it's going to warp the layer because the watercolor paper is going to be much thicker, and it'll force the black to bend with it. But when the watercolor paper is thinner, it's going to go more with the shape of the black. And so when I add some Scotch foam tape to the back of this and put it on top of a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch folded, it's going to flatten out even more because the white cardstock is going to also be a little bit thicker than the watercolor paper. So you can see exactly how flat this gets when you use a thinner watercolor paper. Now I'm going to add the final touch with some yellow stickles, and what I like to do with these small areas is just put a drop of it in the center, and then I'll take my paper piercer and I'll just spread it out kind of like I'm coloring with it to all the tips. And this is a really easy way to get into little small areas and color them nice and evenly without any gaps. And that is the card for today. So just a more subtle way to add some snow, sparkling snow to your card. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.